Daughter uninvited to wedding, so we are not going. Ada? My niece is getting married in the month of April, and the preparations for this grand event have been in motion for well over a year. This wedding is not just any ordinary wedding, it's the union of my sister's daughter, and for our family, it was supposed to be a monumental celebration, one that would mark a turning point in our lives, bringing everyone together under the banner of joy and new beginnings. I am the youngest sibling in our family, which often means that my opinions are overlooked or brushed aside as less significant, but despite this, I have always been a deeply involved aunt, someone who prides herself on being there for my nieces and nephews, especially during milestones like this one. I have one child, a bright, spirited 10-year-old daughter who, from the very beginning of the wedding planning process, was made to feel as if she would be an important part of the celebration. There was never any doubt in my mind that she was included. How could there be? The little moments and gestures reinforced it repeatedly, painting a picture of inclusion and belonging that left us both excited and eager for the big day. From the start, my family made it a point to include my daughter in the planning process, even though we lived far away and could only participate from a distance. My niece, the bride-to-be, reached out several times to ask my daughter about the kind of dress she might want to wear to the wedding. It was heartwarming to see my child's eyes light up at the thought of picking out a dress for such an important occasion, and it solidified the belief that she was genuinely wanted there. My daughter spent hours daydreaming about the event, imagining herself twirling in a dress she would wear proudly, feeling like a little princess among the elegantly dressed guests. There were even running jokes in our family about how we might handle meals during the hectic wedding day, with my niece jokingly asking if we would want to DoorDash McDonald's to keep my daughter happy amidst the formalities. These light-hearted conversations made everything feel so normal, so expected. It never crossed my mind to question her invitation because everything pointed to her being a cherished part of this family moment. We flew in for the bridal shower months ago, adding another layer of reassurance that my daughter was very much included in this journey. She was treated like an honorary guest at the shower, participating in games, helping to open gifts, and mingling with relatives she doesn't get to see often. My daughter left that weekend beaming with excitement, chattering endlessly about how wonderful the wedding would be and how much she couldn't wait to see everyone again. It made me feel proud as a mother to see her so happy and connected to her extended family. Moments like these are rare for us since we live farther away, and I was grateful for the effort my sister and niece were making to include us in such meaningful ways. So you can imagine my complete shock when, 2 weeks ago, my sister called me out of the blue and dropped a bombshell that I was wholly unprepared for. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as if she were bracing herself for what she knew would be an uncomfortable conversation. She explained that the couple, my niece and her fiancé, had made a final decision regarding the guest list. Their wedding, she said, would be child-free. I could feel my heart skip a beat as the words sank in. My immediate reaction was disbelief. There had to be some kind of mistake. Surely, she didn't mean my child. My daughter had been a part of this journey from the start. How could she suddenly be excluded from an event she had been looking forward to for over a year? I clutched the phone tighter, feeling a mix of confusion and growing frustration bubbling within me. I tried to stay calm as I asked her to clarify. "What do you mean by child-free?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Are you saying that all children are excluded, or is there some kind of exception for family kids who've been involved in the planning?" Deep down, I already knew the answer, but I couldn't help hoping there was some loophole, some way to salvage this situation without crushing my daughter's spirits. But no. There were no exceptions. My sister confirmed that all children, without exception, were no longer invited to the wedding. I could feel the anger rising, but I forced myself to listen as she explained the reasoning behind their decision. Apparently, the groom's side of the family included a lot of young children, wild, unruly kids who had a reputation for causing chaos at family events. To avoid the headache of managing them, the couple had decided to implement a blanket child-free policy. It was, in their minds, the simplest solution to a complicated problem. I sat in stunned silence as my sister continued talking, but my thoughts were racing. I couldn't help but think about how unfair this was to my daughter. She wasn't like those wild kids from the groom's family. She had been part of the planning process from the beginning. She had flown across the country for the bridal shower. She had picked out a dress. She had been made to feel like an important part of the day, only to have that ripped away from her at the last minute. It felt cruel, like a betrayal of the bond we thought we had with my niece and my sister. When I finally found my voice, I told my sister that I was disappointed. I tried to keep my tone measured, but the heart was evident in my words. I explained that my daughter had been looking forward to this wedding for months and that it would be devastating for her to learn she was no longer welcome. My sister responded with a sigh, as if she had expected this reaction. She reiterated that it was not a personal decision, that it was about managing the larger guest list and avoiding potential disruptions. But no matter how she framed it, the message was clear: my child was not welcome at the wedding. I hung up the phone feeling emotionally drained. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. How was I going to break the news to my daughter? How could I look her in the eyes and tell her that, despite all the excitement and preparation, she would not be attending the wedding after all? It felt like an impossible task. She had been so excited, counting down the days until the wedding. She had talked about it nonstop, imagining the fun she would have with her cousins and the beautiful memories we would create as a family. Telling her the truth felt like ripping that joy away from her and replacing it with heartbreak. I discussed it with my husband that evening, and he was equally upset. He couldn't believe the audacity of the decision, especially given how deeply involved our daughter had been in the lead-up to the wedding. It's one thing to have a child-free policy from the start, he said. But to include her all along and then suddenly change the rules? That's unacceptable. The next morning, I sat my daughter down and gently explained the situation. As expected, she was devastated. Her eyes welled up with tears, and I could see the confusion and hurt etched on her face. But why? She asked, her voice trembling. I thought they wanted me there. I hugged her tightly, feeling a pang of guilt and helplessness. There were no words that could make it better. Over the next few days, my emotions fluctuated between anger and sadness. I felt betrayed by my sister and niece, but I also tried to see things from their perspective. Planning a wedding is stressful, and I understood their desire to avoid chaos. But the way they handled it was wrong. They had built up my daughter's expectations, only to shatter them. It was unfair and hurtful. My mom and brother were equally outraged when they found out. My brother, who has a 13-year-old daughter, was furious. His daughter had also been excited to attend, only to be uninvited at the last minute. My mom, ever the peacekeeper, tried to smooth things over, but even she admitted that the decision felt like a slap in the face. Despite everything, I tried to remain civil. But the damage was done. The logistics of this wedding were already a headache, even before this unexpected twist. For most of my family, it was a relatively easy destination to get to, a few hours' drive, manageable and convenient. But for us, it required more planning, more money, and certainly more effort. We had to book flights, arrange for a hotel stay, and map out every detail well in advance. It wasn't just a wedding trip for us, it was supposed to double as a mini vacation. We had already paid for everything, flights were booked, the hotel confirmed, and we even purchased tickets to some of the theme parks near the venue. We were excited. My daughter was thrilled, seeing it not only as a chance to attend her cousin's big day but also as an opportunity to enjoy a family getaway, something we rarely get to do. The trip had been planned down to the smallest detail, and we were ready to make the most of it. But then came the bombshell of the child-free wedding. Suddenly, our carefully laid plans unraveled. The joy we felt was replaced with frustration, confusion, and a growing sense of dread. What were we supposed to do now? We had a 10-year-old who was excited about this trip, a child who believed she was an important part of the celebration, and now, With 2 weeks' notice, we were expected to either leave her behind or scramble to make alternative arrangements. It felt impossible, unfair, and downright disrespectful. At first, we tried to play nice. We didn't want to cause a scene or make things harder for the couple. We understood that weddings are stressful to plan, and we didn't want to be the ones to add to that stress. So, we started by asking a reasonable question: would they be arranging for a trusted family member or friend to watch the children who would need to travel? After all, it wasn't just our daughter. Other families would also be traveling with kids, and surely, some kind of solution could be found. Perhaps a designated adult could step in to supervise the children for the evening while the rest of the guests attended the reception. It seemed like a logical suggestion. But the answer was a resounding no. They couldn't possibly ask anyone to do that. Every adult who was invited to the wedding was expected to attend the festivities, and hiring a professional babysitter was apparently out of their budget. That part struck me as particularly infuriating. They were already spending thousands on the wedding itself, on the venue, the food, the flowers, and all the other trappings of a big event, but they couldn't find room in their budget to provide childcare for a handful of kids. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. It showed that they hadn't thought this through, or worse, they didn't care about the inconvenience their decision was causing for their guests. As the days passed, tensions began to rise. My mom, who tends to stay neutral in family conflicts, decided to step in with a suggestion of her own. She proposed that my daughter and her 13-year-old cousin, my brother's daughter, be given a special role in the wedding. Maybe they could be included in the wedding party in some capacity, even if it was something small, like handing out programs or helping with decorations. This way, they wouldn't just be attending as guests, they would be part of the event, giving them a legitimate reason to be there. But, of course, the groom wasn't having it. He rejected the idea immediately. He didn't want kids involved in any part of the wedding, period. His stance was firm and unwavering, and it became clear that he wasn't open to any compromises. His family's unruly kids had soured him on the idea of having children at the wedding at all, and he wasn't willing to make exceptions, not even for family members who had been involved from the start. That rejection stung. It wasn't just a practical issue anymore, it felt personal. My niece had clearly wanted my daughter there, and my sister had been supportive of finding a solution, but the groom's influence loomed large. His refusal to budge made it clear who was calling the shots, and it left a sour taste in my mouth. It wasn't just about keeping the peace anymore, it was about standing up for my daughter and showing her that her feelings mattered. In another desperate attempt to salvage the situation, my sister floated a new idea. She suggested that we fly into my brother's city first, drop my daughter off there, and let her 13-year-old cousin watch her for the night. On paper, it might have seemed like a reasonable compromise until you thought about it for more than 5 seconds. The absurdity of the suggestion hit me like a ton of bricks. My brother's daughter was also uninvited from the wedding, and now they expected her to play babysitter? So, let me get this straight, the 13-year-old, who was hurt and disappointed about being excluded from the wedding, was now supposed to take on the responsibility of watching a 10-year-old while the rest of us went off to celebrate. It was laughable, insulting, even. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at the sheer audacity of it. The suggestion made no sense and only added to the growing pile of frustrations. My brother, predictably, was not pleased. He saw it for what it was, a ridiculous attempt to shift the burden onto someone else. His response was blunt and to the point: absolutely not. He wasn't about to let his daughter be treated like an afterthought, and I couldn't blame him. The whole situation was spiraling out of control, and every new suggestion seemed to make things worse. At this point, I was at my wit's end. We had tried everything, offering solutions, proposing compromises, and trying to be accommodating, but nothing worked. The message was clear: children were not welcome, and we were expected to deal with it, no matter how inconvenient or hurtful it was. My patience was running thin, and my frustration was turning into anger. I wasn't just angry for myself, I was angry for my daughter. She deserved better than this. The final straw came when I realized that there was no way I could justify leaving my daughter alone in a hotel room for an entire evening. The logistics simply didn't work. I wasn't comfortable with the idea of hiring a stranger to babysit her in an unfamiliar city, and I certainly wasn't going to make my husband stay behind with her while I went off to the wedding. That would be unfair to both of them. And the idea of dragging my daughter to the ceremony only to have her leave immediately afterward felt cruel. It would be a slap in the face, a reminder that she wasn't really welcome. After much discussion, my husband and I made a decision. We would still go on the trip, but we would not be attending the wedding. We had already paid for the flights, the hotel, and the theme park tickets. We weren't about to waste that money. Instead, we would treat the trip as a family vacation. We would spend time together, make memories, and enjoy the destination, but we would not subject our daughter to the pain of being excluded from an event she had been looking forward to for so long. When we shared our decision with my family, the reactions were mixed. My mom was disappointed but understanding. She saw our point of view and sympathized with our situation. My brother and his family were fully supportive. In fact, my brother even started considering skipping the wedding himself and joining us for the vacation instead. He was as fed up with the drama as we were and didn't see the point in attending an event that was causing so much hurt. But my sisters, especially the oldest one, who has adult children and wasn't personally affected by the child-free policy, were not happy. They saw our decision as a betrayal, a selfish act that would cause unnecessary drama. My oldest sister, in particular, accused me of being petty and stirring the pot. She didn't understand why we couldn't just go along with the plan and make the best of it. Her lack of empathy only added to my frustration. It was easy for her to judge when she wasn't the one dealing with the fallout. My niece, meanwhile, seemed caught in the middle. I could tell she wasn't happy with the way things had turned out. She had always been kind and considerate, and I knew this wasn't entirely her doing. The groom's influence was evident, and I suspected that if it were solely up to her, things might have been different. But that didn't change the reality we were facing. The closer we got to April, the more the tension grew. So here we are, standing at this awkward crossroads where family ties, emotions, and principles clash in ways I never anticipated. After weeks of deliberation, frustration, and hurt feelings, my husband and I reached the point where we said, "Fuck it, we're still going." The flights were booked. The hotel was reserved. The theme park tickets were purchased. We weren't about to let all that money go to waste. But one thing was abundantly clear: we would not be attending the wedding. There was no way I was leaving my 10-year-old daughter alone in a strange hotel room for hours on end. I wasn't going to send my husband back to the room with her while I danced and drank champagne. And I most certainly wasn't going to look into my daughter's eyes and tell her that she had to sit out one of the most anticipated events of her young life, especially after she'd been made to feel so included for over a year. The choice wasn't easy, but it felt right. It wasn't about being petty, though I'm sure that's how it was perceived by some. It was about protecting my daughter's feelings and standing by my family, my immediate family, the one I built with my husband and child. My loyalty to my daughter would always outweigh the expectations of anyone else, even my own siblings. Still, as I expected, our decision caused a ripple effect within the family. And not the good kind. The reaction was immediate. My sister, the bride's mother, was furious. Her anger wasn't loud or explosive. No, it was the passive-aggressive kind of anger that simmers beneath the surface, manifesting in curt texts, clipped phone calls, and overly formal emails that reeked of disapproval. Her disappointment was palpable, even from a distance. She saw my decision as a betrayal, an unnecessary act of rebellion that would cast a shadow over the entire wedding. To her, I wasn't just skipping an event, I was making a statement, a big, bold middle finger to the couple's rules and choices. And then there was my oldest sister. Oh, she had opinions. She always did. As someone who had raised her kids to adulthood, She often carried herself with a certain air of superiority, as if her experience gave her the right to judge everyone else's parenting choices. She couldn't understand why I couldn't just figure something out. To her, my decision was dramatic, immature, and inconsiderate. She didn't mince words when she called me out, accusing me of creating unnecessary drama and making the wedding about me. According to her, I was blowing things out of proportion, turning what should have been a minor inconvenience into a family-wide scandal. "It's just one night," she said in a text. "Surely, you can manage for one night." I wanted to scream when I read that message. One night? It wasn't just one night. It was months of anticipation, years of fostering a bond between my daughter and her cousins, countless moments of inclusion and excitement that had suddenly been stripped away without any consideration for her feelings. It was the principle of it. It was the message being sent that she wasn't important enough to make an exception for. That she was an afterthought in a celebration she had been led to believe she was part of. My mom, bless her heart, tried to play the role of mediator. She understood where I was coming from, but she also hated the idea of family tension overshadowing the wedding. She wanted everyone to get along, to find a compromise that would allow us all to move forward without resentment. But her efforts were in vain. My stance was firm, and my sister's stance was equally unwavering. We were at an impasse. Then there was my brother. My dear brother, who, like me, was dealing with the fallout of having his daughter uninvited. His situation mirrored mine in many ways. His 13-year-old had also been excited about the wedding, only to be blindsided by the child-free policy. He was angry not just on behalf of his daughter, but for the broader principle. We both saw the decision as a slap in the face, a dismissal of the younger generation in our family. So, when he heard about our plan to still go on the trip but skip the wedding, he started to consider doing the same. "I might just join you," he said during a late-night phone call. "Honestly, I don't even want to go to that wedding anymore." His words gave me a strange sense of validation. Maybe I wasn't the only one who felt this way. Maybe my decision wasn't as outlandish as my sister had made it seem. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain of this story. Still, I couldn't shake the guilt completely. My niece the bride was a sweet, kind-hearted girl. I loved her deeply, and I knew she wasn't entirely on board with the child-free policy. I could sense her discomfort every time we spoke. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but she was caught in a difficult position, torn between her family and her future husband. And while I didn't blame her directly, it was hard to separate her from the hurt my daughter felt. My niece had been the one to include my daughter in the planning, the one to build up her excitement, only for it all to be taken away. The closer we got to the wedding, the more the tension grew. My sister continued to throw subtle jabs my way, hinting at how disappointed the bride was, how upset certain family members were by our decision. The guilt trips were relentless. But I stood my ground. I refused to budge. One particular message from my oldest sister still sticks with me. She wrote, "At the end of the day, it's not about the kids. It's about supporting your family and celebrating love. You're being selfish." Selfish. That word hung in the air for days. I wrestled with it, turning it over in my mind. Was I being selfish? Was I making this about me? Was I putting my pride above my family? But every time I doubted myself, I thought about my daughter. I thought about her excitement when we first told her about the wedding. I thought about her joy at the bridal shower, her giggles when picking out dresses, her wide-eyed wonder at the idea of a grown-up event where she could dress up and feel special. And I thought about the heartbreak in her eyes when I had to tell her that she wasn't invited anymore. That wasn't selfishness. That was love. That was a mother's instinct to protect her child from unnecessary pain. So no, I didn't waver. I didn't cave to the pressure. I chose my daughter's happiness and well-being over appeasing the rest of the family. We packed our bags, boarded the plane, and headed to the destination as planned. But the wedding? We skipped it. Instead, we spent our days exploring the area, visiting theme parks, and creating memories as a family. We laughed. We bonded. We turned what could have been a painful experience into something joyful. Meanwhile, back at the wedding, the drama continued to unfold. My brother and his family ended up skipping the wedding as well, opting to join us for part of our trip instead. The bride's side of the family wasn't thrilled, to say the least. The whispers of disapproval reached us even from a distance. But I didn't care anymore. When the wedding day came and went, I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew our absence had been noticed, and I knew it would be a topic of conversation for months to come. But I also knew I had made the right choice. My daughter was happy. She didn't feel excluded or forgotten. She felt loved, valued, and cherished. That, to me, was worth far more than attending a party out of obligation. As the dust settled, I reflected on everything that had happened. Was I the asshole? Maybe, to some people. But to my daughter, I was her protector, her advocate, her biggest supporter. And that's all that mattered. I'm starting to feel guilty, though, because the truth is that my niece is a sweet, thoughtful girl who never intended for things to spiral out of control like this. It's painfully obvious that she's not happy with how the situation unfolded, but it's equally obvious that she's stuck. There's this unspoken weight hanging over everything, the kind of tension that only arises when family dynamics collide with deeply personal decisions. And I know where that weight comes from. It's the groom. There's more to that story, much more than I've let on. I've tried to keep the focus on the child-free wedding drama, but the reality is that the groom's personality plays a massive role in all of this. He's the kind of person who likes control, who sees compromise as a form of weakness. From the very beginning, his influence has been woven into every decision about the wedding, and it's clear that my niece has been walking a tightrope, trying to balance his preferences with the expectations of her family. It's not my place to psychoanalyze their relationship, but let's just say there are enough red flags to fill a football stadium. And yet, here we are, 2 months away from the wedding, and nothing is likely to change. My niece is locked into this, either unable or unwilling to push back against her future husband's demands. What makes the whole situation even more frustrating is the way they've tried to soften the blow with the children can attend the ceremony clause. Kids, including my daughter, are technically allowed to be present for the 15-minute ceremony, but then they have to leave immediately after. It's a half-hearted concession that feels more like a slap in the face than a genuine gesture of inclusion. What's the point of letting my daughter sit through 15 minutes of vows, only to send her packing when the real celebration begins? It's as if they're saying, you can watch from the sidelines, but don't you dare think you're part of this. It's cruel in its own way, and I refuse to put my daughter through that. The idea of dragging her to the ceremony just to whisk her away as soon as the happy couple says, I do, is infuriating. My daughter would sit there, hopeful and excited, thinking she's part of something special, only to be reminded once again that she's not really welcome. The emotional whiplash would be unbearable, and I won't do that to her. It's not just a waste of time, it's rubbing salt in the wound, a wound that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Still, despite my conviction, guilt lingers at the edges. Family conflict always leaves its mark, no matter how justified your actions feel. I've replayed the events in my mind 1,000 times, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Maybe I should have pushed harder for a compromise. Maybe I should have swallowed my pride and found a way to make it work. Maybe I'm the one making this harder than it needs to be. The what-ifs are endless, and they keep me up at night. If you think I'm the asshole here, I can understand why. I've broken ranks with my family, defied the unspoken rule that you show up for weddings no matter what. I've made a decision that many would see as dramatic or over the top. But realistically, what should I do? Should I leave my daughter behind, knowing how heartbroken she would be? Should I show up to the wedding and pretend that everything is fine, even as my daughter sits in a hotel room, excluded from the very event she helped plan for over a year? Should I push my husband to stay behind with her while I attend the reception alone, splitting our family apart for the sake of appearances? None of those options feel right. None of them align with the values I've tried to instill in my daughter, values like loyalty, fairness, and standing up for yourself when something doesn't feel right. I want her to know that she matters, that her feelings are valid, and that I'll always have her back, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Isn't that what being a parent is about? Making the tough calls, even when others don't understand. And then there's the groom. The elephant in the room. The man my niece is marrying, who, from what I've gathered, has been the driving force behind many of the more controversial wedding decisions. I've tried to keep my opinions about him to myself, but the more I hear, the harder it becomes to stay silent. There's a controlling, rigid streak in him that worries me. The way he's handled the child-free policy, shutting down every compromise, refusing to consider the feelings of his fiancée's family, is just one example. There's a pattern emerging, one that suggests he's more concerned with getting his way than building meaningful relationships with his new in-laws. I'm not the only one who's noticed. My mom, ever perceptive, has dropped hints about her concerns. My brother has outright said that he doesn't trust the guy. Even my niece's friends have raised eyebrows at some of his behavior. But no one feels comfortable saying it outright. This isn't just about a wedding. It's about a relationship dynamic that feels, frankly, unhealthy. Yes, there's a part of me that wants to grab my niece by the shoulders, look her in the eyes, and say, "Run. Run far and fast. You deserve better than this." But I know that's not realistic. People don't leave relationships just because someone else tells them to. They have to come to that realization on their own, and often, it takes time. I hope she sees the red flags before it's too late. I hope she realizes that love shouldn't come with so many conditions and rigid rules. But unless some miracle happens between now and April, I don't see that happening. So, here I am, stuck in limbo. We've made our decision, and we're sticking to it. We'll take our trip, enjoy our time as a family, and skip the wedding. And maybe that makes me the troublemaker, the difficult one, the black sheep of the family. But at the end of the day, I have to live with myself and my choices. I have to look my daughter in the eyes and know that I did right by her. Just a note: I know people love updates. Everyone wants to know how these stories end. But if I do update this, it won't be until after the wedding, and only if something major changes, which, frankly, I don't see happening. The groom's personality is what it is, and unless he has some kind of miraculous epiphany, nothing about this situation is likely to improve. I've accepted that. So, I'll wait. I'll watch from the sidelines as the wedding approaches, and I'll do my best to move forward without carrying resentment. But one thing is certain: no matter what happens, I won't regret standing up for my daughter. That's a choice I'll never second guess. And as for my niece, I'll always love her. I'll be there for her when she needs me, whether it's during her marriage or after. Because if there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that family is messy. It's complicated. It's full of mistakes and misunderstandings. But at the core of it all, it's about showing up for the people you love, even when it's hard. Even when it means walking away from a wedding to protect a 10-year-old girl's heart. Am I the asshole? Maybe. But I'm also a mother. And in this situation, that comes first.